Well, good day to you. And today I want to continue on the series that I'm busy with on enemies of a godly marriage. And our installment of today is part number 5 of the series. And today I want to specifically focus on what we call a critical spirit. Again, our keynote text is in Ephesians 5 verse 33. And I'm reading from the Amplified version, the classic version. It says, "However, let each man of you, without exception, love his wife as being in a sense his very own self, and let the wife see that she respects and reverences her husband, that she notices him, regards him, honors him, prefers him, venerates him, and esteems him, and that she defers to him, praises him, and loves and admires him exceedingly." So in this session, I want to speak to you on the enemy that I want to call a critical spirit. And today's session is not going to be long, but I am going to give you some additional references that you can go and look at, and go and study, and also give you links to where some of these can be downloaded for your convenience. A critical spirit or a mindset, I believe, is one of the most destructive enemies in a marriage relationship. I don't know if you know this, but have you realized that a critical spirit can be very, very toxic to your marriage? The problem is that as human beings, we have this tendency to revert towards a place of negativity. We tend to constantly complain about anything and about everything. Now, when we take this kind of behavior and mindset into a marriage relationship, that marriage relationship actually becomes destructive. Now, the typical kind of statements that we often hear in such a marriage relationship where there's a critical mindset or a critical spirit that is operating is, "My husband or my wife drives me crazy when she does this or this or this." Now, if we are constantly looking for everything that our spouse or our partner does wrong, or not just the way in which we would do it, we're going to find something that we can criticize. And it needs and demands from us that we truly and really need to take a step back and make sure that when we look at something that we believe is not right or should be done otherwise, that we are not operating and functioning in a critical spirit. The word here is very clear. If we go to Ephesians 4, verse 1 to verse 3, it says, "I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you were called, with all lowliness and gentleness, with long suffering, bearing with one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace." Now that is your bottle of medication against allowing a critical spirit to function and to operate within your marriage relationship. Why am I choosing this scripture? Because it says, "I beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you were called." Now we can become very spiritual and use this in terms of ministry for the Lord and being in full-time ministry, being a pastor, being a leader, whatever you want to call it. But when you entered into a covenantal relationship in marriage, that in itself is also a calling. And the demand here is that we need to walk worthy of the calling with which you were called, whether that calling is to be a husband or whether that calling is to be a wife. And then it continues and it describes it. It says, with all lowliness, humility, gentleness, long suffering, and the one that we don't want to hear, bearing with one another in love. And then is the instruction, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. God's desire is that we should endeavor to stay in that place of oneness in the Spirit and to live our lives in peace. You see, sometimes our facial expressions or even the tone that we use when talking to our partner can convey disrespect or even disgust. And sadly, what happens often is that over time, those seemingly simple offenses begins to accumulate and then eventually end up in doing damage to your marriage relationship. How then do we overcome this in a marriage relationship? Let me say to you that a critical spirit in marriage is something, and it's a mindset that needs our intentional attention. We need to deal with a critical spirit intentionally. You need to sit down and identify those things that you are criticizing and then do it one at a time. Then you need to begin to identify them, prioritize them, and then begin to start dealing with them individually, first of all, in your own heart. And then stop complaining about it and keep your mouth shut. Choose to release forgiveness immediately in every instance until you have overcome those feelings of negativity and of criticism. Now, those of you that has journeyed with me for many years will know the story of how me and my wife got married. It was actually, it's totally different from most of other people's stories because we got married not because we fell in love, but because we obeyed God. God spoke to both of us individually and said to us, this is your husband, this is your wife, you must marry him. Both of us reverted to a time and a period of rebellion because not one of us wanted to get married. But eventually we repented and we came to a place where we accepted that that's God's plan for our lives. And then went into the process, we got married. Now you can imagine. Two people not really loving each other, just walking in obedience with the Lord. Of course, we were going to have our differences, and each one of us has got a very strong personality. So you can understand that it was a recipe for disaster to a certain extent. But there was a time when I was really upset with Renette. And don't ask me today what it was because I can't remember. And I was telling the Lord, you told me to marry this woman, and now look at what she's doing. And the Lord spoke to me and he said, okay, Mom, sit down and make a list of everything that bothers you. Man, I love that, eh? And I said, I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. And I wrote my long list of complaints and everything that I wanted to criticize and everything that bugs me. And I felt so good. And then the Lord spoke to me again. And he said to me, turn this paper around now. And I turned the paper around. And he said to me, now I want you to write down all the good stuff. Everything that you appreciate about it. Boy, oh boy, it was like cold water in my face. I was very upset. I said, Lord, this is not what I want to do. But eventually I sat down and I started doing it. And as I was writing down these positive things, something within me changed. And I began to see Renette as God sees her. I began to see all the good stuff. I began to see all the good things. And eventually, when I came to the end of it, I think really God has got a sense of humor, because he said to me, okay, now turn the paper around. And as I turned the paper around, this complaining list was this long and the positive list was this long. And it was just kind of tongue in the cheek, the Lord said to me, so what's your problem? And that is where I realized that I need to come to a place of where I deal with my own things in my own heart before I can speak to her about those things that bothers me. And in that process, the Lord took me through a journey where he said to me, do you remember Jesus on the cross? And I said, yes, Lord. He said, what was my words? I said, Jesus, you said to those people that were crucifying you, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He said, what happened at the cross with that forgiveness? I said, Lord, you forgave everybody for what was happening at that time. You forgave them for the sins of the past. And also you forgave them for things that we are still doing today. So I understand that concept. And so he said to me a mind-blowing thing. He said to me, Herman, I want you to forgive your wife, Renette, for everything of the past, everything that's happening now that has caused you to be so upset. But I also want to forgive her for what she's still going to do that's going to upset you. I went through the process. I repented. I cried before the Lord. And I made the choice and made the decision. So when Renette got home that night, because I was working shifts at that time, it was during a period that I had some days off, I shared with her this thing that the Lord showed with me. And I asked her forgiveness and I repented. And so it went well for a while. After about 3 weeks, she did something again that really messed with my head. And I was really getting there to get upset. And as I was getting upset, the Lord said to me, Hannah, what are you doing? I said, what do you mean? He said to me, you have already forgiven. If you take a balloon and you take a sharp needle and you pop that balloon, that's the way I felt. It was just everything, all the anger, all the resentment just popped. And there was nothing. And I realized, but I've already forgiven her for what she's doing now. And this is what I want to leave with you. Is there certain principles that God gives to us that we can live our lives according to. And if you are in a marriage relationship, I want to encourage you to come to this place in your marriage relationship with one another. And not only in your marriage relationship, but also in your relationship with others around you, where you make a quality decision to forgive them for everything that they have done, everything that they are doing now, and everything that they're still going to do in future that's going to upset you. And you will find that you will have a lot easier life because you begin to live in what I want to call a culture of forgiveness. So I want to again say to you, you need to choose, once you've gone through that process, choose to release forgiveness immediately and do it in every instance until you've overcome those feelings of negativity and criticism. Remember, the whole purpose of this is to get to that place where even when your partner is making a mistake, you continue to love them, to forgive them, and not to judge them. It all boils down to one thing, and that is to see them as God sees them, and to continuously, in that process, release grace and forgiveness towards them. Most of the time, you will find that if you stop nagging and criticizing, it becomes no longer an issue. And as a result, you often find that even the behavior and the conduct changes as well of your partner because you have changed. I can remember I read a book many years ago about a lady for women that was always frustrated with her partner. And then the Lord guided her to the place where she stopped praying to God to change her husband, but to change her. Uh, I, I think this book is still in print, but it is available. I went and I did some research, and it's really a good read, and it's also got some real practical advice. Now, the name of the book is Lord, Change Me, and it's written by Evelyn Carroll Christensen. I went and I did some research. This book is still available on Amazon, and I will post a link for you to this book at the end of the video in a QR code and also physically, so that you can see it at the bottom of the screen, so that you can have easy reverence to this book. I encourage you to start a journal where you write down one thing on a daily basis that you really appreciate about your partner. And this exercise will help you to make this process practical, and also will help you to change your mindset and your attitude towards your partner. You will begin to appreciate the positive and the good qualities about your partner and stop seeing the negative. And of course, guys, all of this will go hand in hand with forgiveness. And this is a topic that I will cover in our next session, when I'll speak to you on the things of unforgiveness and forgiveness. And I want to leave all of this with you, and I say to you, grace and peace to you in this wonderful journey of falling in love all over again with your partner. Grace and peace to you, and may the Lord expedite this in your heart and in your life in Jesus' name. Great grace to you all. Thanks for watching.